Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our second webinar this year in our series of webinars on ensuring accurate classification of BRCA1, BRCA2 and other HRR gene variants. If you didn't get a chance to listen to our first webinar, I highly recommend that you do. We've shared it through the GenQA and EMQN websites and social media channels. A fantastic introduction to the work we're doing. But today we're going to concentrate on what we've been doing for the first run. So next slide, please. So just a few housekeeping points before we get going. We have automatically muted your microphone to avoid any background noise. This webinar, like all of the webinars, will be recorded and you will be able to watch it back at a later date if needed, or share it with your colleagues. We will, of course, notify you when that's available. And most importantly, we value your interaction in these webinars. Without your ongoing interaction, you know, some of the work that a lot of the work we do needs your input as well. So we have a Q&A function session here, so you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom browser to submit your questions for the dedicated session at the end of it. We should have enough time to do, you know, a reasonable number of your questions as normal. The only comment I would make is, please, when you're talking about specific variants, and we have 6 different variants to go through today, please ensure you preface your question with which variant you're talking about. And if you're talking about a general one, then obviously make it clear it's a general question as well. Okay, next slide, please. Your feedback's incredibly important to us. We do listen, and we have over the years made a lot of changes to our webinars to accommodate that feedback. It's our intention, obviously, to provide you with material that's highly educational that you can use for training both your staff and obviously your ongoing personal development. So after the masterclass, you will receive an email with a link to a short feedback survey. Please do take the couple of minutes it takes to fill it out. We do value your feedback on it. So please do consider doing that. So if you can, if that would be welcome and gratefully received. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to hand over to my co-chair, Professor Sandi Deans from GenQA, to do the introductions behind the webinar. Over to you, Sandi.
Thank you, Simon. So just to add my welcome to everyone on the webinar today. We are joined by 3 of our expert advisors who have been supporting the delivery of run 12 of our BRCA1, BRCA2 and HRR gene variant classification EQA. And we have Dr. Andrew Muryani from Alberta in Canada. So it's very early in the morning for him to join us. So welcome, Andrew. We have Dr. George Burghel from Manchester Genomic Laboratory Hub in the UK, and also Dr. Maartje Vogel from Amsterdam Lab in the Netherlands. So next slide, please. Just to make sure you're aware of a disclaimer, this is a non-promotional webinar organised and funded by AstraZeneca and MSD, and that the views are of those of the speakers and the co-chairs. Thank you. Next slide, please. So as I say, we're here today to look at the overview of the participation so basically your results submitted for this EQA run 12, which was delivered during April 2024. Also, we have our expert panel who are going to walk through their interpretation and classification of the 6 variants that have been supplied. So next slide, please. So this is delivered through the Genie module. So that's the Genomic Online Individual Educational Platform through GenQA. And it's one of the modules where you can access it through the website. It's available globally all year. And in fact, for these EQAs, they are set times in the springtime and also in the autumn. We can generate scenarios randomly, and you can participate multiple times and get your own assessments back in real time. And it's really a training and performance review source and tool for managers in laboratories. So there's more information on the website, but this is one of the platforms that we use to deliver these BRCA and HRR gene variant assessments. Next slide, please. So looking specifically at run 12 that has just completed, we had over 500 individuals who had registered to participate, but unfortunately this dropped the number of just over 300 who actually completed the scenarios. But we are getting global reach, and it shows you how much in demand that resources and the ability to assess and interpret variants really is a global issue. So we had participation from 52 different countries. Majority of those, over 170, were actually based in the UK, but you can see the next set of countries that were represented most frequently were based in Europe, but we do have a global spread, and it's great to see that we have colleagues joining us from right across the globe. And I think that's partially because it is an online system, so it is fit for purpose for anyone, regardless of where you're classifying variants. So next slide, please. One of the advantages of delivering EQAs is you can actually find out what is happening on the ground and for example, we can see which guidelines are being applied by our participants. So we have different options here. We either have the ACMG 2015 classification system, or we have an option using this classification plus the UK ACGS 2020 variant guidelines. And then we have an option whereby it's both of these guidelines plus the UK CanVig 2020 guidelines. And we have the Enigma option and then others for those in-house other classification systems or a mixture of different combination of guidelines. The one thing that I would like to note here for you to take notice of is the difference between Run 12 and Run 11, which was performed in November in 2023. And that is the vast increase in the number of individuals using the Enigma guidelines. There was 11% of participants last year, whereas in April, we saw that this had increased to 24%. Next slide, please. We can also look at the background and areas of expertise of participants through the data that's submitted for the EQAs. For this run, not surprisingly, the majority of participants, up to 68%, were from the genetics community. We can also see about 9% were from oncology, and then the next most frequently represented community was pathology. We also can see where the expertise and their knowledge base of participants, and again, not surprisingly, they're experienced scientists for over 50% of the participants. This was closely followed by other, which I think we need to probably break down and try and interrogate who this 24% are ticking the other box. But you can also see that we have recently qualified scientists, we have medics, pathologists, and also students participating. Next slide, please. So as Simon mentioned, we offered 6 different variants to be classified by participants. As always, we try and get the spread across BRCA1, BRCA2, and other HRR genes. And here we used PALB2 as our 6th variant for assessment. Again, we also try and get a spread of different range of classifications. I think it's very important that people have the assurance that they can classify benign and likely benign variants just as well as they can classify pathogenic and likely pathogenic. And I think what's really interesting here, you can see that 2 of the variants that we presented have different classifications depending on the guidelines and the rules that are applied. And I think our expert speakers are going to cover that in more depth shortly. Next slide, please. We have had a significant drop in the performance of participants in this run compared to especially the previous run, whereby we only had 2% of individuals who had classified 6 of the variants as expected. The majority successfully classified 4, but here you can see there's a real spread of the number of individuals classifying each variant correctly. We do need to probably look at why this is the case, and I think as we go through the criteria that's been applied by our participants on this webinar, you'll start to see where the most challenging variants are sitting and which criteria are the most difficult to apply. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to hand over to Maartje to give us an update on the classification of variant 1.
Thank you, Sandi. So next slide, please. So the first variant is a missense variant in BRCA1, which is located in a functional domain, the BRCA2 domain. Next slide, please. So this variant is absent in GNOMED version 2 and also in GNOMED version 3. You can find the relevant information about this variant when you go through to the BRCA Exchange website. You see the identifier here on the slide and also the link. There's one submission for this variant in ClinVal, and the laboratory there classified it as a VUS. And on this slide, you also see the bioinformatics codes, sorry, the in silico predictions for this variant that we used in our classification. Next slide, please. So when you use the Enigma guideline, so the BRCA1 gene-specific guideline, you can reach a classification of class 3 for this variant. When you use the CanFIG guideline, you can come to class 4. Next slide, please. So on the left panel on this slide, you see the classifications for the different classes that the participants submitted. And what you can see is that the majority of participants classified this variant as likely pathogenic, class 4, which is the correct classification when you use the CanFIG guideline. And also a big number of participants classified it as class 3, which is the correct classification if you would use the Enigma guideline. On the right side of the slide, we looked into this data in a bit more detail and asked what the classifications are of the participants that used a specific guideline. So yeah, I personally think the results are a bit somewhat disappointing, in the sense that what you can see here is that when people use the CanFIG guideline, which is the yellow part of the bar, they come to classification of class 3 or class 4 or class 5, whereas it should be class 4 using this specific guideline. And also for the Enigma guideline, you should get to class 3, but as you can see here in the figure, people using the Enigma guideline also get to class 4 or even class 5. Next slide, please. So when we look at the evidence that we gathered to get to these classifications, the biggest piece of evidence for this variant is the functional data that is available. So there are 2 papers where this specific variant is tested, and you see them here. It's the paper of Finlay et al., where they see that this is a loss of function variant, and also the paper of Fernandez et al., where they say that this variant is predicted to be pathogenic. And these 2 papers you can use using the Enigma guideline and also the CanFIG guideline. Next slide, please. So when you want to find out how much weight you should give to a certain publication, there is guidance that tells you how you should do this. And that's the paper from Sarah Burnich et al. And they give you, well, really clear, but also sometimes it's a lot of work, instructions on how you should evaluate functional studies. The good news is that if you work on BRCA1, a lot of the work has been done for you. Next slide, please. So when you, so I'll start on the left with the Enigma guidelines. So if you go to the Enigma BRCA1 gene-specific guideline, which you can find through the ClinGen website, you can find table 9. This is an Excel table. And what you have to do is look up your variant in this table. And in this table, you'll find most functional studies that have been done for BRCA1 and BRCA2, and they have been evaluated for you. And in this table, you can find which code you should use and also which way you should apply. And you can find in this table that for this specific variant, you can use PS3. So a strong piece of evidence. And obviously, you should also have a look at the papers yourself. You can find the PubMed IDs also in this table. when you use the CANFIG guidelines, you can go to the CAMFAR website and look up your variant. And also there you can have a very nice, you find a very nice digest of the functional data that is available for this variant. When you click on the link, an Excel opens, and in this Excel you can also very easily find which weight you should apply to the certain to your specific study. And in this case, you also get to PS3, so strong piece of evidence for the functional data. Next slide, please. Then the PM5 subcode. So this is a code that you can, or a piece of evidence that you can apply using the CANFIG guidelines, but not the ENIGMA guideline. Next slide, please. So PM5 is the code that you can use when you have a missense variant on a position that previously another missense variant has been found to be likely pathogenic or pathogenic. When you use the ENIGMA guideline, you cannot use the PM5 code. The PM5 in its original way it was in its original meaning is considered a component of the bioinformatica analysis, so you should not use it as an independent code. However, sometimes there is PM5 code usage in the ENIGMA guideline, but this is because the code has been repurposed. So it's now used for a completely different situation. It's used for nonsense and frameshift variants in a certain context. And you can find details on that on the guideline. But it's good to realize that PM5 is only can only be used with CANFIG in this way. So when we look at the PM5 usage by the participants that use gene-specific guidelines, and that's in the figure below on the slide, we see that of the 318 participants, 168 applied PM5. 22 of them used the ENIGMA guideline. And as I just told you, the PM5 code should not be used following this guideline. 94 participants used the CANFIG guidelines, and then they applied the code PM5, which is correct, at different levels. 32 of them used level supporting, and that is what we think the correct weight you should give this piece of evidence. And I'll explain that on the next slide, please. So how do we get to PM5 supporting? Well, so the question is, are there any other missense variants at this position which have been classified as likely pathogenic or pathogenic that we use? So the first thing that you need is the Revel score of the variant under assessment or variant under examination, as it is called in the CANFIG guidelines. The Revel score of our variant is 0.67. And as you can see, and that's highlighted in yellow on the right of the slide, that when your Revel score has when your variant has a Revel score below 0.773, you should use PM5 at level supporting. And there's and also you should look at you should compare your Revel score of your variant to the Revel score of the reference variant. And if the Revel score of the variant under assessment is lower than the Revel score of the reference variant, you should stick to supporting. So on the screenshot on the left, you see that there are several candidate variants at this position that have been classified, at least can be found with a classification of pathogenic or likely pathogenic in ClinVar. And these are good candidates to look into. So what we did, we looked at those variants, checked if we could get to a classification of pathogenic or likely pathogenic using the CANFIG guideline. And then there's one important thing you have to also look at, And that is a remark that is made with the explanatory note. So that's also highlighted in yellow on the right part of the slide, the bottom yellow sentence there. And it says that you only can use PM5 together with a PS3 if the reference variant can be classified as likely pathogenic or pathogenic without using functional data. So yeah, you should keep that in mind. And next slide, please. So what we did is checking these variants, and this was the first variant that we found which fulfills the criteria. It's a change from glycine to valine. And for this variant, there's multifactorial likelihood data available. You can easily find that through the ChemVic or ChemFAR website. And you can classify this variant as pathogenic based on this data without using the functional data for this variant. There's also functional data available, but we don't use it to reach pathogenic. And therefore, the conclusion is that we can use PM5 at level supporting for our variant under assessment. Next slide, please. There's one small but or a caveat. During the run, the newer version of the ACGS best practice guidelines also became available, the 2024 version. And we noticed that in there, they say that you can only use PM5 when your REVEL score of the variant under assessment is actually higher than the reference variant. That's not the case for our variant, but because this guidance is really new, we decided to stick to the gene-specific and cancer-specific guidance. And I think this is one of the examples how difficult it is to get all the guidelines. Without things like this, but it's something we should be aware of. Next slide, please. So there were 61 participants that classified this variant as pathogenic. And when you look into the evidence codes they used, it's really clear that this comes this is caused by the incorrect use of PP3 and also PM1. And I'll discuss those two evidence pieces. Next slide, please. So PP3. So PP3 is the code you can use for the in silico predictions. And of the 318 participants, almost 200 did not use PP3. And that is correct because PP3 is not met, not under the ENIGMA guideline and also not under the ChemVic guideline. And I'll show that in the next slide. But what I want to show here is that there were also participants, there were also 126 participants that either used the ENIGMA guidelines or the ChemVic guidelines that applied PP3. And we think that's PP3 is not met. So next slide, please. So when you use the ENIGMA guidelines, and that's on the left, and you want to know which bioinformatic code you can or cannot apply, the easiest thing to do is use figure 1A. And here you see a screenshot of part of this figure, so the relevant part for this variant. And you just have to follow the lines and you get to the right answer. The information that you use to get there is the Splice AI score. You need to know if the variant is inside or outside the functional domain. And you need the Basedel predictor. And in this case, because the Basedel score is 0.24, the Basedel score is not informative. You can see one, I think it will be hard to read, but you can see that in the key. It's a non-informative score and therefore PP3 should not be used. Using the ChemVic guidelines, and that's on the right part of the slide, is a bit more easy because in this case, what you see is that the REVEL score is 0.67 and that is below 0.7, which is the cutoff for PP3. So PP3 is not met. Next slide, please. And then, yeah, PM1. So when you use the Enigma guideline, PM1 is not used. PM1 is considered as a component of the bioinformatic analysis. And when you use the CAMFIG guideline, when you use the CAMFIG guideline, you at first might think that you can use PM1. So PM1 is evidence that a variant is located in a mutational hotspot or in a well-established clinical and functional domain. And if you carefully read the instructions, you might think that you can even use PM1 at level moderate, because our variant is at a specific residue in the BRCA2 domain. But if you read a bit further, you see it's stated that PM1 cannot be combined with code PS3. So PS3 is the functional data code. And also there's also another place where you can find this, and that is the at the end of the CAMFIG general CAMFIG guideline. You have this these diagrams where they show you which codes you can or cannot combine. And there you can also see that PM1 together with PS3 is not allowed. And you can also see that PM1 should not be combined with PM5. And that's also a code that we apply for this variant. So therefore, PM1 is not applicable here. Next slide, please. Yeah, I'll mute myself. So.
Thank you, Maartje. So I'll just walk everyone through variant 2. If we can move to the next slide, please. So it's a missense variant in BRCA1, and it's not in any of the specific functional domains. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is just summary of some of the elements that we looked at. So with regards to population frequencies, it's been recorded 4 times in NOMAD version 2.1.1, the non-cancer females, a much bigger number in NOMAD version 4.1, which includes data from UK Biobank, 72 cases, one of which is a homozygous case. It's not been reviewed on BRCA Exchange, and there are conflicting submissions on ClinVar, including few likely benign ones. And listed there are the in silico predictions, Revel, BaseDel, and Splice AI. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of the evidence that we are suggesting to apply in these cases. So for following the Enigma guidance, we think you are able to use BS1 supporting, BS2 moderate, and BP1 strong. And using the CAMFIG guidelines, you can use BS1 strong, BS2 strong, and BP1 supporting. And just looking at the overview here, you can see that although we're suggesting a similar classification, you can see that the different elements have been used at different strength levels using the different guidelines, and we'll walk through them now. So next slide, please. So this is the summary of the classifications from the participants. You can see that the majority have classified as likely benign, few has classified as benign, and some has classified as uncertain significance, with one submission as pathogenic. And we think we have a good reason for why likely benign was the most common class. Next slide, please. So if we walk through the evidence used by if you're following the Enigma guidelines in terms of BS1 supporting, it meets the filtering allele frequency, which the ClinGen guidance restricts you to NOMAD version 2.1 non-cancer exomes only. Next slide, please. And that basically is within that range for being able to use BS1 supporting. Next, please. So BS2 moderate, I think, is one that has, looking at the submissions from the participants, the one that has been used less often. But if you look at this table in the supplementary material from the Enigma guidance, you see that you can use patients' cases that are as homozygous cases with certain criteria of age. And in this case, if you go to NOMAD version 4, which includes the UK Biobank data, you will find this homozygous case with a patient aged 65 to 70, which gives us 2 points on there. If we can follow up, if you can, sorry, go to the next slide. Now, why this is a little bit controversial to use or not to use, you can see that in the guidance they state that we should not apply data used to assign frequency-based codes. So in general, NOMAD can't be used, and that's because usually if you used, if it's that common in NOMAD, you would have used that information for either BA1 or BS1. But in this case, because we restricted the filtering allele frequency to NOMAD version 2.1, we feel that you can choose to apply the UK Biobank data with a single homozygous case, and we have the age of the patient, and it classes as assumed unaffected. But in this case, I have checked with the data from UK Biobank, and the patient does not have, or this case does not have any cancer. So you have to do a little bit more things in order to reach this decision, but we feel it does fit within the guidance to still use BS2 moderate. Next slide, please. And for BP1 strong, that's more clear. Using the Enigma guidelines, it fits that nicely. It's a missense variant, and it has no splice prediction, and it's outside the important functional domains. So that gives us BP1 strong. Next slide, please. So in total, you get BP1 strong, BS2 moderate, and BS1 supporting, which gives you a benign classification. Now, using the CAMVIC guideline, please, if we can move to the next slide. This case does meet the criteria for BS1 strong. So if you look at the BRCA1-2 CAMVIC guidelines only, you will notice that there is less information about all the different sources that you can use, but we do direct in the guidelines to look at the consensus guidance for more details. And within that, you can see that reference population data from UK Biobank can be used to calculate maximum tolerated allele count. So if we go to the next slide, please. And so if you apply the calculations using the CardioDB calculator, there's a link for that in the guidelines if you haven't used it before, and you use the data available from UK Biobank, you can see that we have an allele count of 71, which is greater than the maximum tolerated reference allele count, and so can be used as BS1 strong. Next slide, please. And then for BS2, we're also using the homozygous case, which is observed in a specified control population, in addition to heterozygous frequency meeting BS1. Next slide, please. For BP1, it's very similar to the Enigma guidance, but in CAMVIC, the strength is capped at supporting, different to the ability to use it using the Enigma guidance up to BP1 strong. And added together, next slide, please. These all give us a total of -9 points exponent score, which meets the criteria for a benign classification. Again, BS2 was one of the ones that was differently used, but without that, you will go down to likely benign. Next slide, please. So these are some of the submitted classification. Like I say, most people had a concordant classification of somewhere between likely benign and benign, mostly likely benign due to different ways or underuse of BS2 as such. That was the main reason for the spread of the classes. One entrance as pathogenic, which listed PM2 and BP6. So I'm just wondering whether a pathogenic was chosen by mistake. And that, I think, concludes variant number 2. I'll hand over back to Maartje.
Thank you. So variant number 3. Next slide, please. This is also a missense variant in BRCA2, which is located in the DNA binding domain. Next slide, please. There's one male found in NOMAD version 2, and this variant is not present in NOMAD version 3. There's several submissions in ClinVar, and the variant is there classified ranging from VOS through likely benign to benign. And on this slide, you've also find the in silico predictions that we used in our classification. Next slide, please. So using both the ENIGMA guideline and the CAMFIC guideline, you can come to class 2 for this variant. Next slide, please. Most participants classified this variant as class 2, which is the expected classification, and also quite some variants came to class 3. Next slide, please. So here's the evidence that we used to get to our classifications. And the biggest piece of evidence here, next slide, please, is again functional data. So there's the paper of Richardson et al., and they've tested this variant and concluded that it's a neutral variant. And if you want to know now how you should value this paper in your classification, you can do that in a very similar way as we did for variant 1. So you can go through the Excel files, look up your variant, and there you get your answer on which code you can use and at which weight. And both the ENIGMA and the CAMFIC guideline tell you that you can use BS3 at level strong for this variant. So strong evidence pointing at benignity for this variant. Next slide, please. Then there is the BP4 code, which you can use when you use the ENIGMA guideline. Next slide, please. So BP4 is one of the bioinformatics codes, and to find if you can use one of the bioinformatics codes, you have to follow the flowchart in figure 1a. And for this specific variant, you need a splice AI score of 0. You need to realize that it's inside a functional domain, and you need the Basedell predictor, which is a -0.12. And if you follow the flowchart, you come to the conclusion that BP4 can be applied. When we look at the CAMFIC guideline, there the Revel missense predictor is used, and the Revel score is 0.45. And this is not low enough to use BP4. As you can see on the screenshot, when the Revel score is below 0.4, you can apply BP4. So BP4 is not met using the CAMFIC guideline. Next slide, please. Then there's a piece of evidence that we had quite some discussion about, and that is PM1 sub, which you can or cannot use when you use the CAMFIC guidelines, and I'll discuss that. Next slide, please. So PM1 is the evidence, the code that you use when you have a variant that is located in a mutational hotspot or in a well-established functional domain. And as you might remember, when I discussed variant 1, I told you that it's not allowed to use PM1 and PS3, so the functional data encode PM1 together. But for this variant, we have functional data, but it's not a PS3, so functional data pointing into the direction of pathogenicity, but it's BS3, so benignity, direction of benignity. And the question is it now allowed to use PM1 together with BS3? So when you look in the instructions, it's just not completely clear. You find a line which makes sense, which tells you that when functional data is used for a specific variant, you should not use PM1, so information on location of a hotspot or domain, as typically the functional data informs the demarcation of a domain hotspot. So that's not independent evidence anymore. On the other hand, and that's in the right panel, the yellow line, highlighted line next to the question mark, there you explicitly can see that PM1 should not be combined with PS3, but it's a bit unclear if this also holds true for BS3. So George was kind enough to bring this up at the CSTAG meeting. I'm not sure what this stands for, but this is the group of people that discusses the guidelines in the UK, I guess. And the conclusion was that PM1 and BS3 should not be used together. And also that in the next update of the guidelines, this will be made more clear and this will be added. So next slide, please. Then there was more than 100 participants that classified this variant as class 3. We looked into the evidence codes that they used, and this was mainly because the functional data was not used or not used at the right weight. So there were 89 participants that did not use or did not find the functional data for this variant, and there were also 9 participants that used it at moderate or supporting, while it should be used at strong. And if you don't have BS3, it's difficult to get to class 2 for this variant. Next slide, please. And then.
George, I think we can't hear you. I think you're still on mute. So
yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes,
so moving on to variant 4, but if anyone has more questions regarding the classification of variant 3, especially with regards to CanVIC guidance and the different elements, we can discuss this at the Q&A session. So moving to variant 4, next slide, please. This is a splice site variant located at intron 26 in BRCA2. So next slide, please. It's absent in NOMAD, and I have further comments on that now. It's not reviewed in BRCA exchange, and it has mainly likely pathogenic submissions on ClinVar, but with a VUS submission, and also a high splice AI prediction for a donor loss. Next slide, please. So we have classified this as likely pathogenic using the ENIGMA guidelines and pathogenic using the CanVIC guidelines. However, on review of the variant, after the slides have been made and submitted, we have come to realize that PM2 supporting does not necessarily hold using the ENIGMA guidelines, because it is actually listed once in NOMAD version 3. So we'll come to that in a minute. But if we can go to the next slide, please. So most participants, as expected, has classified this variant as likely pathogenic or pathogenic, mainly likely pathogenic using Enigma, and pathogenic using the CanVig guidance. A few participants have classified this as a variant of uncertain significance, and no one classified it as class 1 or class 2. Next slide, please. So this splice site is an in-frame splice site, and if you follow the Tayun et al. PVS1 framework, you might end up with a PVS1 moderate or PVS1 strong. It does affect an important area related to function as per Enigma guidance, but if you follow Tayun et al. Without the knowledge of the specific domains, you might end up with PVS1 moderate because it only takes out less than 10%, or you might end up with PVS1 strong if you use the functional domain. However, if you go to the next slide, please, within the Enigma guidance, if you haven't used this before, they provide a very nice table, and they do provide a very nice BRCA1, BRCA2 specific PVS1 schematic, but in the tables that are presented here in figure 6, they show different downgrades or upgrades of PVS1 based on a very specific knowledge of BRCA1 and BRCA2, and you can see that PVS1 in this case for this variant is upgraded from strong based on it being a functional domain to very strong. So they recommend the use of PVS1 very strong rather than the use of PVS1 strong. Now that was the main reason that we have seen for participants classifying this as variant of uncertain significance, while everyone else classified as likely pathogenic or pathogenic. Next slide, please. Like I said, it's absent from Nomad version 2.1 and the UK Biobank, which allows us to use it at PM2 moderate in CanVig, alongside PVS1 very strong, which is following the Enigma guidance, which gives us the pathogenic classification. With the Enigma guidance, we, on review, like I said, it was too late to amend this presentation. We have noticed that it is also present in one case in Nomad version 3, which we have missed in this case. So if we are strictly applying this following the Enigma guidance, actually this variant will end up as a variant of uncertain significance, because you will only be able to apply PVS1 very strong. And some people follow the classification using the exponent scores, which might still get you to likely pathogenic, but using the Enigma and using the rules of not being able to classify a variant based on a single evidence criteria, this variant will end up as a variant of uncertain significance using Enigma, still pathogenic using CanVig guidance. So it's another point to discuss in the Q&A session, but the majority of the participants have classified this as likely pathogenic or pathogenic. And I think that's it for variant 4. Thank you.
Next slide, please. So variant 5 is a nonsense variant in BRCA2. It's located in the last exon. Next slide, please. So this variant is absent from Nomad version 2.1 and version 3.1. It's in BRCA exchange as well as ClinVar, and there's no in silico predictions because it's a nonsense variant. Next slide, please. So using the Enigma guidelines, we get to a classification of class 5 or pathogenic based on PVS1, PM2 supporting, and PM5 strong. Using the CanVig UK guidelines, we get to the same classification, and we're using the same evidence, but we use it slightly differently. And I'll get into that in the next couple slides. Next slide, please. So the majority of participants did classify this as expected as class 5, with some also getting to class 4 and a couple also as class 3 or uncertain significance. Next slide, please. So this variant is a nonsense variant in the last exon of BRCA2, so it's not expected to undergo nonsense-mediated decay. If you were to use the Taiyun et al. Decision tree, you would only be able to get this variant to PVS1 strong at the highest because you aren't undergoing nonsense-mediated decay. However, the Enigma guidelines have their own decision tree for PVS1, and they've actually upgraded the strength of the variants that occur upstream of amino acid 3309 to very strong. So with this variant, even though it's not expected to undergo nonsense-mediated decay, you could actually use PVS1 as very strong. Next slide, please. Additionally, for the Enigma BRCA1 and 2 guidelines, as mentioned earlier, they've repurposed PM5. So originally, this was applied for novel missense changes at an amino acid residue where a different missense change which is determined to be pathogenic, has been seen before. However, for the BRCA1 and 2 recommendations, they've repurposed this for protein termination codon, so PTC variants in an exon where a different proven pathogenic PTC variant has been seen before. So there is a table. So in figure 8, they have assessed all the exons for BRCA2 and applied different levels of strength. And there's even a table, I forgot which one specifically this is in the guidelines, but you can look up where the amino acid change is and determine the strength of evidence. So in this exon, even though it's the last exon, you can use PM5 at a level of strong because it is upstream of amino acid 3309. Next slide, please. Using the CanVid UK guidelines, they followed a similar pattern with PVS1, whereas even though it doesn't undergo nonsense-mediated decay, because it is upstream of, this change is upstream of amino acid 3308, you can apply PVS1 at a strength of very strong. And as this variant is completely absent from the NOMAD version 2.1 and 3.1 databases, you can use PM2 at moderate instead of supporting like it is in the the Enigma guidelines. The CanVig UK guidelines do not modify the PM5 to apply to truncating variants like they do for the Enigma guidelines. Next slide, please. So the two different schemes arrived at the same conclusion using the same evidence, but they did use it slightly differently. CanVig UK uses PM2 at a level of moderate, whereas Enigma uses it at a level of supporting, and then Enigma also repurposed PM5, in this case at a level of strong. 88% of the participants did classify this variant as a class 5. Of those that classified this as class 4, 29 used PM2 at a strength that wasn't in alignment with the guidelines they said they were following, and 4 used PM5. It's hard to assess because if you're using CanVig UK, PM5 isn't appropriate, but there were more than 4 individuals of the 29 that got to likely pathogenic that were using the Enigma guidelines. So some people just missed using PM5. And of those who classified this variant as class 3 or class 2, only 1 used PVS1, which makes me wonder if perhaps they weren't aware that they could use PVS1 for this particular variant. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe because it's in the last exon, or they didn't realize nonsense variants are applicable for the PVS1 decision tree. But that was the main difference for these classifications. Next slide, please. And so the last variant is a variant in the PALB2 gene. Next slide, please. It is a frameshift variant. Next slide. It is present in Nomad version 2.1.1. It's seen 5 times. It's also present in ClinVar with 28 labs calling it pathogenic, 2 likely pathogenic, and 1 risk factor. Next slide, please. So in this case, the ACMG ClinGen recommendations and the PALB2 CanVig UK recommendations were aligned. They use the same evidence at the same strength, so it's fairly easy to follow through. So in this case, we use PVS1 at very strong, PS4 at strong, PM5 at supporting, and PM3 at moderate. And this is another case where the PM5 evidence has been repurposed for a different purpose. Next slide, please. The majority of individuals did classify this as expected as class 5. There were some individuals that classified this as class 4, and we think we have some explanation for why this was. And then a couple of individuals classified this as class 3. Next slide, please. So using the PALB2 decision tree, you get to a strength of PVS1, very strong, which was fairly straightforward. Next slide, please. Once again, as I mentioned before, PM5 was repurposed to apply to frameshift and truncating variants that are upstream of amino acid 1183, as this is the last known amino acid to be pathogenic. So unlike the BRCA1 and 2 guidelines, where there's different weights of evidence, right across the board for PALB2, PM5 is used at supporting, regardless of which exon the protein truncating change is found. Next slide, please. Additionally, PS4 could be used based on this publication in the Lancet Oncology, where they found for this particular variant an odds ratio of 4.09 with a confidence interval, an odds ratio of 5.02 with a confidence interval from 1.55 to 16.2 and a p-value of 0.0016. This fulfills the criteria of PS4 as the odds ratio is greater than 3. The confidence interval does not span the 1.5 mark, and the p-value is less than 0.05. So this qualifies for PS4. Next slide, please. Additionally, there was another publication where this variant was found in trans, and this variant was phased in this individual. It was found in trans with a pathogenic variant in an individual with Fanconi anemia. So this adds up to 2 points, which then qualifies for PM3 at moderate strength. Next slide, please. So overall, 91% of the participants classified this variant as class 5. Of those who classified this as class 4 or class 3, and none used PS4, and only 1 used PM3, and then half of them used PM5 at supporting. So half of the individuals did not apply PM5. Overall, 94% of individuals used PVS1 appropriately. 43% used PS4 and 28% used PM3. The reason I point these out is these pieces of evidence are based on publications, and these weren't freely accessible journals. So it's completely possible that individuals did not have access to these publications. And I think this is a challenge. I'm not sure how this can be overcome unless all these journals are made publicly available, but if you can't access the information to review, you can't really use it. So I understand why some individuals may not have been able to use PS4 or PM3 for this variant. Interestingly, 42% of individuals did use PM2, even though it did not qualify for PM2 by either guideline, and 27% used PM5. So there's a large proportion of individuals who missed that PM5 could be used. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Andrew, very much indeed. Okay, so now we've had a lot of discussion and information around the different variant classifications. This is always nice to see the bubble plot. So this is a summary of the classifications submitted by those participating. The larger the bubble, the more participants have classified that variant in that way. Anything in green is the expected classifications, and those in red are those that have been submitted by participants. So you can see here, just as we've very eloquently heard, that, for example, variants 5 and 6 have been classified really quite well, where the green expected classification is where the majority of individuals agreed with our panel. Variant 2, again, as we've just heard, there's reasons behind why the majority of individuals classified the variant as 2 as likely benign, whereby we had expected it to be classified as benign. Also, variant 1, again, here you can see how they get variation depending on which guidelines you apply. So, for example, the Enigma guidelines were coming out at VUS, whereas the CanVig is coming out at a likely pathogenic. So again, I think there's underlying issues why we see a range of classifications. And I think, as George very eloquently explained, that even when we are using different guidelines, time actually does have an impact as well, which we can see here from that variant that was expected to be classified in one way, and then when more evidence is applied, that it can be changed in real time. So it shows you it's just quite a fluid exercise. I think also that was a really good point about the inherent issue of access to publications. I think that's a limitation that we all have to work with, and it shows that really the evidence out there in publications, peer-reviewed publications, is incredibly important when it comes to fine-tuning the classification of variants. So if we go on to the next slide, please. Just to update you that we are now collating and analysing the data through the EQA run, and we aim to publish the EQA summary report out to everyone in July, August time. And then, as always, our second run this year will be provided in early autumn, and that will be run 13 and will be advertised, and you'll be notified both on the GenQA and EMQN websites. So if we move to the next slide, please. Simon, I'm going to hand over to you because I can see we've got a raft of different comments and questions coming in, particularly for variant 3. So it's great to see we've got some time to go through some of the queries that have been raised.
Thank you, Sandi, very much indeed. So for you, the participants, yes, we've teed up George and Maartje for variant 3. We anticipated feedback and we've got plenty of it. So keep it coming in. It's great. So just to sort of kickstart off the discussion, really, the Q&A. So I think I'd just echo Sandi's point. I think it's very clear from the graphs we presented, particularly for cases 1 and 4, actually, the variation we are getting from the different guidelines and how people are interpreting the different variants according to those guidelines, where we've actually split the graphs up actually by Enigma versus CanVig guidelines. So I think Sandi's point's very relevant here. And of course, as we will see from case 3, you know, it's a fluid and dynamic situation, and we are adjusting our assessment based on that as well. I'm going to start off really with a general point. And I noticed there was a couple of questions really from participants about UK biobank data. So I'm very keen to hear the participants' perspective, sorry, the panelists' perspective on this. So the questions really relate to the fact is that UK biobank data only unaffected individuals? And my understanding is it's not. It's more of a population-specific sampling. So it may well contain individuals who are affected with cancer, for example. So if we do take that as correct, does that have an implication for the classification, using it for the classification of BRCA invariants, where we are, in theory, supposed to be using it for non-cancer females? Is that correct, that interpretation?
I can comment here, Simon, if that's okay. So UK Biobank is a population screen, so it does contain cases. It's not only non-cancer cases. There's a lot of discussions about how to move to the use of UK Biobank data. So at the moment, we are limiting So we're using it for case control studies in PS4 as per the CANVIC guidance, and we also use it as an extra layer of stringency to apply PM2 at moderate. It has to be absent in both, but the data does contain a variety. It is a population screen. In the case that we have used it for case 2, we have checked specifically for the homozygous case, and the case does not have any cancers recorded for that patient. But yes, it is adding complexity to how we apply the evidence.
Thank you, George. I think that's the clarification I think we needed, and hopefully that's okay for the participants there. George, while we've got you on the call, so let's do case 2. We've got nothing coming in for case 1 at the moment, but there are I picked up on a couple of questions relating to the use of BS2 and BP2 in BRCA1 due to hypermorphia, I think it is. Could you comment? I think we did cover that. We did cover the use of BS2 and BP2, but do you have anything more to add to that at all?
No, sorry, I can't see the specific question.
So it's one of the first questions. It basically says, case 2, is it okay to use BS2 and BP2 for BRCA1 due to hypermorphia? See explanatory notes on CANVIC guidelines version 2.8. And there is also another question that sort of alludes to the same thing. So in the consensus CANVIC guidelines, it states for cancer susceptibility genes, BP2 and BS2 should only be used for those genes in which typical non-hypermorphic biallelic variants can cause a recognized phenotype that is fully penetrant in infancy. So they thought it shouldn't be used for BS2 for that variant. I think that's what they're trying to infer.
Okay, I think I have to look at that detail, and maybe we can respond by email to that specific query.
We'll cover that in the general report if that's the case. Then so I think that leads us nicely on to case 3. Sandi, I'm over to you on this one.
Okay, happy to tackle this one. So for variant 3, there's only one piece of, oh, my screen's just jumped. There's only one piece of evidence of pathogenic and one piece of benign evidence. So are we okay to purely go on the points for classification? I think the non-cancer, oh, hang on, my screen keeps jumping about because there's more and more questions coming in. I think the non-cancer guidelines suggest that you need to have at least 2 pieces of evidence going the same way, so to speak.
Maartje, do you want me to comment on this first, or are you happy to take it first?
Yeah, I think part of the confusion or difficulty that we have to find our way in is that there's a slight difference between the ENIGMA guidelines and the CANVIC guidelines at this point. And maybe I can say something about the ENIGMA guidelines, and then George, you can take over and explain the CANVIC part. So for ENIGMA, you in this case, you get 2 benign codes, so that's not a problem. But when you would have had 2 contradictory codes, you are allowed to use the point system to resolve this. And it doesn't matter in that sense, that these are contradictory. But for the CANVIC, that's a bit different. George?
So, Jonathan, I saw the comment from you, so and I totally agree. The problem is that we uncovered some slight discrepancy in different CANVIC outputs, which we are working on correcting now after the evaluation of this variant. So I totally agree. It now currently have 1 piece towards pathogenic, 1 piece towards benign, and based on the fact that we need, so in the main guidance, there is no clear statement about having 2 or more concordant evidence criteria. However, that is very clearly stated in our combination paper, which states that you need at least 2 concordant criteria. So the paper that I'm referring to here, just for the record, is the Garrett et al. From 2020, which basically talks about combining evidence for and against pathogenicity. And in that paper, we clearly state that you need a minimum of 2 concordant criteria. However, sadly, in the same paper, we have an example that matches this variant, and that's why we allowed it in this instance, and it will be corrected in the CANVIC criteria. So there is an evidence listed, an example listed in table 7 of the Garrett et al. 2020, where it shows -4 as a strong evidence for benignity, alongside a contradictory supporting evidence for pathogenicity at 1 point, giving you a net exponent score of -3. And we're in that table, we're stating that you can use that to classify as likely benign. Now, that is in disagreement with the principle that we need 2 concordant criteria, and that will be made more clear on the consensus CANVIC guidance and on the gene-specific CANVIC guidance, and we will also submit a correction to the Journal of Medical Genetics to correct that combination should not be used as likely benign. And so we did not want to cause more confusion in this instance, and we allowed the classification at likely benign, but I agree that you can reach a variant of uncertain significance, and with the updates on the CANVIC guidance, you will reach a variant of uncertain significance for this variant. So excellent question there.
Thank you, George. And I think that's a great example how just worked examples using new evidence as it evolves is starting to shape the guidelines as well, isn't it? There's quite a few questions coming in around the use of different guidelines and standardization. And I think everybody's really challenged about what the approach should be. So I think one of the good questions that have come in is about, is the key message to use one set of guidelines and not flip between multiple sets for a particular case and variant? What's your views about that?
I can take this one.
Thanks, Andrew.
I answered one in the chat already. I think it's important to stick with one set of guidelines. As you can see from this scheme, and this happens, I think, almost every time we do this, there will be some variants where there's a conflict between CANVIC and Enigma. And so I think for the consistency of your lab, wherever you're working, it's important to stay consistent with one set of guidelines.
Great, thank you. I think that sounds a very sensible approach, doesn't it? What's your views also on the fact that we're now starting to see gene-specific guidelines come out? Would your recommendation, I know we touched this in depth on previous webinars, but is your advice does that supersede the more generic guidelines? Is that the way that we should be looking at things going forward?
Oh. Maartje, did you want to take it?
You go for it. What do you think?
Yes, I would strongly recommend using the gene-specific guidelines. They are in place to help resolve some of the issues that the general guidelines did not take into account for a gene of interest. So for BRCA1 and 2 and PALB2 and I believe ATM even, they've added PM5. They've repurposed PM5 to give more strength to protein truncating variants. And so that was to give extra evidence to help classify these variants. They've also, for the Enigma guidelines, pointed out which functional evidence is most useful. CANVIC UK also did that for the BRCA1 and 2. They point you towards which publications are useful for functional evidence and what strength to use it. So it helps take some of the guesswork out of the general guidelines. So I would strongly recommend using them.
Great, thank you very much. Simon, do you want to pick up another few questions?
Yeah, we've got some questions. I think we'll go to variants 4 to 6, I think, Sandi. Again, just as a comment for the participants, we will try, where possible, if we don't get around to answering some of your questions, incorporate them into the scheme report. So for variant 4, which I think was George, Sorry, George, I seem to be coming back to you very often here. I'm really apologise for that.
That's all right, happy to.
There's a question around why we use PVS1 instead of PM4. So how could we confirm the PVS1 decision tree? Could we go back to the calculation of nonsense mediated decay? I think, and again, there's another question that sort of kind of alludes to that again as well, which is relating to. No, carry on. Just go with that one there. That says the same thing effectively.
That's purely following the Enigma guidance, which, like I said, is built on long experience within these two genes. That includes a lot of functional and a variety of studies. So this simply, if you go to the guidance, the table that was screenshotted on our classification, you will see that they list all these splice sites and they put clearly their recommendation of what to use as evidence. And in this case, PVS1 very strong is recommended by Enigma.
Fantastic, thank you, George. And of course, you can go back to the recording after this if you really need to go back and just double check the slides. All the evidence will be available to you to watch afterwards. Andrew, I'm going to come on to the last variant, variant 5. Sorry, variant 6, which is the PAL-B2 variant. We've got a question here relating to just one second, make sure I've got it right. No, let's move on. We won't go that one. I think we can answer that one we'll answer that one specifically afterwards in the calls. Sandi, while I'm just pulling another one, would you like to take another, if you're able to take one while I find another question to go to?
Yeah, here's one. One about variant 4. So this is the splice site variant. So somebody's saying it's not clear to me if a VUS is considered incorrect. It looks like that even though following Enigma criteria would be a VUS, since the majority decided for likely pathogenic, it is classified likely pathogenic. Could you please clarify?
I can answer that. No, it wasn't. We haven't decided that it's likely pathogenic. Like I said at the start of that, we apologized because it was too late for us to correct because of the presence of one case in Nomad version 3.1. It is strictly using Enigma guidance. It will be a class 3. Again, shows that different guidance can get you sometimes different answer. Class 3 using Enigma, class 5 using Canvic. So in this case, it's our mistake that we haven't spotted the case on Nomad version 3.1. And I can see, sorry, Sandi, a question specifically about that case. Yeah. That if someone is asking, not informative and still apply PM2 supporting. We have looked in details on that case on Nomad version 3. It has nice quality metrics, good depth of coverage, balanced call, and it's listed as non-cancer. So we feel we have to apply it. So once we get the report of the scheme, we can clarify the situation with this variant.
Thanks,
Can I
George.
add to that? Because
yeah,
I think
please do, Maartje. I was going to bring you in.
More relevant point to this, very, very complicated variant. So one of the questions is when I have a PVS1 and PM2 sub, which we now know is incorrect, and I look those two evidence codes up in the table that comes with the BRCA1 Enigma guidelines, I don't see this combination allowing you to go to likely pathogenic. So that actually was a bit of a surprise to me, and we looked into that. And what we noticed is that there's also a confusing situation. So the table which instructs you how to combine codes that you see on the online is a different table than the table that you will find when you open the specifications. So the table in the specifications is the BRCA1 gene specific table, which is put together by the Enigma, and the other table is actually the general I'd say ClinGen ACMG table, but that's very confusing because you don't see it. But I think the take-home message is, please, when you want to know how to combine the codes, please open the supplemental data, so the specifications, and use that table. And then you get to a likely pathogenic when you have a proper PM2 sub and a PVS1. So that's an extra layer of confusion, I'd say. But
yeah, it's table, just for those, it's table 3, which listed as rules for combining criteria following adapted ACMG AMP approach within the main specification document of Enigma BRCA1 and BRCA2 version 1.1, which sadly differs from the combination table at the bottom of the online page. And again, we clarified that with the VSIP, and hopefully that will be made more obvious to participants. So yes, as Maartje said, please head to the specifications document, table 3, and you will be able to use that combination to achieve likely pathogenic.
We promise to summarize this again in the report, because
I think
well,
we need to, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you both, because I think that's, I mean, you've actually done a very good job of explaining it here. I think, I mean, there's a couple of thank yous coming in from the participants as well to say exactly that. Andrew, I've got one here for variant 6, so I finally got one for variant 6, which is good to see. So the question says, can the publications that, so it really, this is talking about paywalls and the problem this is generated, you alluded to in your discussion. Can we make those publications available that have been used to apply to PS4 and PM3 in some way, shape, or form? What's your possible? I mean, we can certainly facilitate within the boundaries of what we're allowed to do, but we're happy to certainly help out if necessary.
I honestly don't know what the rules are in that sense, if we're allowed to freely distribute. If we are, I'd be happy to, but I don't know.
Yeah, it very much depends, as I've said before, whether we're allowed to. But so we can certainly, I mean, if there's an opportunity there, we've got the ability to do so, then clearly we can certainly signpost those publications definitely to the participants.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Or what we could do, maybe, Simon, is contact the corresponding author and see
absolutely.
if they would give their permission for us to put a link on our website or something. That may work.
Absolutely. I mean, as a more general point, this is a problem, isn't it? But I don't think it's anything we're going to be able to resolve from our activities. But if we can signpost it and help facilitate and share the information with the participants, then it's got to be something we can do to improve the access to data like that. Sandi, is there's I think we've probably covered most of the questions here.
I've got one here that applies to Maartje and also George. So it covers variants 1 and 2. So they're both missense variants in BRCA1. So the question is, why can BP1 only be applied for variant 2?
So variant 2 is outside the functional domains. So again, in the Enigma guidelines, which is also followed by the CanVig guidelines for these, you will see a detailed definition of these functional domains, and certain criteria are limited to applying the evidence for missense variants that sit outside the specific domains, and they provide the C dot and the B dot description of these domains.
Thank you, George. That's very clear. I've got one really for the three of you, and it's something that we all struggle with, I think, in clinical service. So what do you do when you have a variant, a clinician contacts you because there's one classification from one lab and the same variant's been classified in a different laboratory using different guidelines, and they've come to a different conclusion? What do you normally, I'm looking at Andrew because he's right in the middle of my screen. Andrew, what do you do in your laboratory?
So we encounter this quite a bit, actually, and we always review the variants ourselves. So we always assess the evidence and review them ourselves. As a lab, we follow the ClinGen ACMG recommendations, so we're not changing between different classification systems, but we always review external classifications.
Great, thank you. George, what happens in the Manchester lab in the UK?
Same apply to us. So when we receive a variant classified in an external lab, whether that's within the UK or outside the UK, we re-evaluate the evidence. We contact the lab. We ask for, if it's not clear on the report, we ask for what type of evidence they used and any reasoning behind it. Sometimes they have some extra evidence that's not publicly available. Sometimes they just followed different criteria. Based on that, we make our classification and any follow-up based on what class we reach to.
Thank you, George. And same question to Maartje, I guess.
Yeah, I think we do the same in the Netherlands as Andrew and George. And I think it's always key to see if there's new evidence that you can use to update your own classification, or that it's a more academic discussion about the guideline and the version of the guideline that you used, which is interesting, obviously, but having new evidence for a variant, that is the most, I think, for a patient, interesting thing to know, because then you can probably upgrade your classification.
Yep. And I think this EQA run's just evidence that itself, hasn't it, that things do change and it's evolving. Yeah. Simon, the final question from you.
Yeah, I have one final question. So this is a more general point to the team. So our next run will take place in the autumn. I think the scenarios go out October, Sandi, if I'm correct, or is it November?
Yes, it is. It's October. We go live.
Okay, so question for all three of you. Do you think the new ACMG guidelines will be published by then?
I don't know, but I don't think so. We've been waiting quite some time now, so I'm suspecting not, but just a
bit
guess.
tongue-in-cheek, obviously, but George?
I doubt, based on what we hear from others, that it will be published before then.
And Maartje?
Well, I
we're
think
all in agreement.
I don't think it will be published, but even if it is published, it will take on some time to adapt to the new codes and the new way of working. So I don't think you'll find any experts to sit in the team for the new.
I think we would all agree with. Yeah, we would all agree with that perspective. Absolutely true. And of course, we will obviously incorporate any new guidelines into an update at some stage when they do come out, and we've got a bit of expertise ourselves and be able to do that. Sandi, should we draw it to a close there? We're just about on time. So a big thank you to you, the participants. Without you, obviously, we can't run these activities. So we hope you found it educational and informative, and more importantly, great for your personal professional development. A huge thank you to the panelists, to George, to Maartje, and to Andrew, for your insightful and contribution to this process. We really value your expertise, and I think it really makes it, it works so well, this format. A big thank you to the organisers, the team behind the organisation, and also a big thank you to my co-chair, Sandi. So we will. I don't think there's anything else we need to cover, Sandi. We've already advertised the next run, etc. So we will catch up with you when we next launch our webinar, which will be in sometime in October, I think, if I remember rightly.
It will be. I think it's September. We straddle the EQA run. Yeah.
September.
And can I just add my thanks to Simon and everyone on the call as well, but also to the team within GenQA and EMQN that actually are hands-on delivering these EQAs,
Absolutely.
and particularly Becky and Rachel. So thank you as well.
Yes, thank you all. So have a good day, everybody, and thank you for dialing in. We much appreciate you dialing in. We will make the webinar available afterwards. Usually takes 2 or 3 weeks to get it published, and we will, of course, let you know via the usual channels. Thank you for your time.